Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah, wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. First of all, I'd like to thank Bahria University and the organizers of this great and wonderful event, honoring a personality whom we all hold dear to our hearts. I am possibly the least deserving person of this opportunity because I'm taking a humble attempt at such a enormous task, which is, and I'll hope and pray that I will be able to do some justice to it. So my interest in the topic of Tarbiyat Khudi comes from my background in clinical psychology. I am a psychologist and I practice at the Khalil Center, which is the largest provider of Muslim mental health in North America. When I read through the poem, I realized how much this poem addressed human development and self-development. So with that in mind, I thought of writing something on this and also trying to present a theoretical model that can be implemented clinically as well. So with that said, when we talk about Iqbal, one of the things that I'd like to always begin with is talking about who Iqbal is and who I consider Allama Iqbal. Iqbal and other Islamic philosophers, they formed their view from religion. And so I always felt that the most appropriate terminology used to describe Allama Iqbal and other Muslim philosophers would be not a philosopher, rather a theosopher. So, a definition of a theosopher would be someone who maintains, develops the knowledge of God within their philosophical realm. And that's something that you see Allama Iqbal do. Even in this model that I'll talk about, the ultimate goal that he presents to the human, to Muslim, is to achieve the highest level, which he calls Niyabat Ilahi. When we talk about Khudi and when we talk about the disciplining and development of Khudi, we also have to take into consideration when Iqbal's teachings came to us and when they became relevant to us. So we know that Allama Iqbal obviously lived in the late 1800s and early 1900s. And this was a time when Muslims were possibly at the lowest, especially those Muslims that lived in that area. We know that Muslims were struggling with their identity, and as part of the colonial culture, which is something that we inherited from them, our identities were not just related to being a part of the Muslim ummah or the millat that Allama Iqbal talks about. Rather, we looked at ourselves through the businesses that we owned, through our family of origin, through our culture, whether you're Punjabi or Afghani, and then even specific like madhab and religious identification. So all that taken into account, Muslims were scattered internally as well as externally. So Allama attempted to bring that identity back to them, the identity of being a true Muslim, the one who lives and serves for the sake of Allah. So now, obviously, we know that Islam had reached the Indian subcontinent, some say during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, if not shortly after. Now, Muslims didn't really officially begin to rule India until the 1200s, but that rule, the 700-long-year rule, ended. And it ended in a very traumatic and tragic manner. And so reconciling that identity, the status of the Indian Muslims was important. And this is what Allama Iqbal wanted to do. I think what he may or may not have realized is that the importance of his teachings were not just limited to that time and place. Rather, it was something that would help even people in the future, such as myself and others. So what is Khudi? I'm not going to get into that. That is not the crux of what I want to talk about today. A lot of people have tried to quantify and qualify it, and it has been a very difficult task for many. The way I use my operational definition for the sake of this presentation and a subsequent article is that Khudi is a life force that is innate within the human existence. and it's innate because it begins from this primordial existence that we had before we were born, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about in the Quran that He gathered all of humans and He asked them, the souls, and He asked them, "Am I not your Lord? Alastu bi rabbikum?" And everyone replied, "Bala." And so Khudi strives towards achieving that goal of reuniting with the ultimate creator, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it's cultivated through self-reliance, self-respect, self-confidence, self-preservation, and even self-assertion in the cause of truth, justice, duty, and morality. So that's my operational definition. If you go through the literature, you recognize that many individuals have attempted to define Khudi in their own way. Now, the model of Tarbiyat Khudi, there's a difference between a psychological-based model of self-development and a theosophical-based model, right? For a psychological-based model, we look at the most famous model, perhaps, which is the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Now, the difference here would be that Maslow's model focuses a lot on the needs that exist within this world. It is a biological-based, meaning it looks a lot at your basic animalistic instinctual needs. It's a reductionistic model. It's individualistic. It doesn't take into account other individuals around you. It does to a point where it's more of like what the others can do for you rather than what you can do for others. Even Maslow himself realized that his model was insufficient in reaching the ultimate goal, and he even added a self-transcendence as another stage beyond the self-actualization. But still, this model is like self-centered. It definitely misses spirituality, and again, it's based on the Darwinian mindset of animals being evolving, humans being evolving animals. And so when we look at Islam, obviously, we know from our own history, whether we look at the Prophet ﷺ or the Sahaba or other great Muslims, that humans can become self-actualized even when their basic needs are not being met. When you look at Iqbal's model of Tarbiyat Khudi or self-development, there's a lot of distinct attributes to it. Obviously, it gives human that potential. When he says that I have recognized from Mi'raj, I've taken this lesson that a human being, a mushtakhak, in this poem he mentions the word, is able to reach the levels of the sky. So the very high potential that it provides for a human, for a believer. And also, like I said, Iqbal recognizes that life is not just from birth to death, that there's a primordial beginning and then there's a post-mortem ending. And our life continues on after our death in this world. And so development of Khudi and Tarbiyat of Khudi is necessary to then strive towards that path towards spiritual ascension. Now, in Asrar Khudi, he writes in the introduction of the work, and I quote him here, that physically and spiritually man is self-contained center, but he is yet a complete individual. The greater his distance from God, the less his individuality. He who comes nearest to God is the complete person, complete individual. Not that he is finally absorbed in God. On the contrary, he absorbs God in himself. There's a saying that people attribute to Ali radiallahu anh, and some even have said it's a hadith, but it's not a hadith. It said that man arafa nafsahu faqad arafa rabbah, that he who understands and recognizes himself recognizes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, and then also it is said, I was told a story where someone had asked Allama Iqbal about how he came to this development of this model of Khudi. And he pointed to an ayah in Surah Hashr where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَا تَكُونُوا كَالَّذِينَ نَسُوا اللَّهَ فَأَنْسَاهُمْ أَنفُسَهُمْ أُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْفَاسِقُونَ. Do not be like those who forgot Allah and Allah made them forget themselves. So there is a correlation between knowing yourself and knowing Allah. When I first read his model, I had also come across a hadith. And we know Allama, alhamdulillah, has utilized Quran and Sunnah a lot in his teachings and his writings. In this hadith, which is reported in the Bukhari, Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu said that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that Allah Ta'ala has said, so the hadith Qudsi, that whosoever shows enmity to a wali of mine, then I have declared a war against him. And my servant does not draw near to me with anything more love to me than the religious duties that I have obligated upon him, the faraid. And my servant continues to draw near to me with the nawafil, the supererogatory deeds, until I love him. When I love him, then I am his hearing with which he hears, I am his sight with which he sees, and his hand with which he strikes, and his foot with which he walks. Were he to ask something of me, I would surely give it to him, and were he to seek refuge with me, I would surely grant him that refuge. So in this model, there are three different levels or stages that Iqbal presents. The first is ita'at, obedience. The second one is zabt nafs, which is controlling yourself. And the third is, he termed niyabat ilahi, so being a naib of Allah, being a deputy of God. So my process in this whole development of this presentation and article was to look at how Iqbal described some of the key concepts, qualities of these stages, so that we can use them from theoretical and then apply them and make them more practical, especially for me as a clinical psychologist, for myself first and foremost, and also for my clients. So if you look at the first step that he talks about, the first stage, which is ita'at, I'm not going to translate his work or go into detail about exactly what he says. What I have done is taken some words from his writings, and then occasionally I've added some words myself, but most of the words are from what Iqbal presents in the model, or the idea that he's trying to give when he talks about these concepts. So in ita'at, or obedience, he presents some qualities that a person, someone who is obedient should have. For example, he says khidmat, service, mehnat, toil, sabr, patience, istiqlal, perseverance. Someone who, in Iqbal in this poem is using the analogy of a camel. A camel doesn't eat much, it doesn't sleep much. A camel does its work noiseless. It does it happily. It puts jabr on itself, right? Goes through hardship to take care of what needs to be taken care of without complaining. And I think that's very important when it comes to ita'at. Then he goes into self-control, zabt nafs. Now, in zabt nafs, interestingly, Allama here emphasizes the innate drive and qualities of what the nafs is. So a nafs has some innate attributes. It's khud parvarast, self-growing, egotistic. It's khud parast, self-conceited, self-worshipped. It's khud sarast, it's stubborn, it's rebellious. And it's khud sawar, it's self-governed. Right? So when we recognize that we have this aspect within ourselves that is, it grows, it's fed more, it worships only its own desires. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about it in the Quran as well, like أَرَأَيْتَ مَنِ اتَّخَذَ إِلَهَهُ هَوَاهُ, like people, those individuals who have taken their own desires as their God. And it governs its own self, and it's meant to be rebellious and stubborn. It's not going to be someone who complies quietly. And the two driving aspects of this nafs that Iqbal talks about are love, muhabbat, and fear, khawf. And so Allama talks about how there's love of maladolat, like the wealth and the riches of this world, the love of country, wataniyat, the love of yourself, the love of people around you. So as a man, he uses the terminology for women, but you could say, someone who's very close to you, aqraba, and our nafs is driven through those. And then there's fear. There's fear of this world. There's fear of the limitations of this world, fear of the hereafter that might drive us. Because, again, the difference between someone who is working towards being a naib of Allah and someone who is just doing things out of fear, that's a very childlike morality that exists, that we act based on consequences and fears. There's also fear of your life. There's fears of alam zamin wa asma, the pains of this world. those pains are one of the driving forces for our actions of our nafs. And so how do you overcome this? Now, going back to the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ as well, which was the hadith Qudsi, where Allah says that the believer gets closer to me through the faraid. So Iqbal uses that concept, that these faraid, the 5 pillars of Islam, kalima tayyiba, salat, saum, zakat, hajj, all of these are meant to fight your nafs and the different drives, the different qualities and different aspects of your nafs. So, for example, he says, kalimat tawheed or kalimat tayyiba is meant to fight khawf. It's meant to fight fear. And why? Because when you say that I believe that no one is worthy of worship except Allah, then you no longer fear anyone else. You no longer fear the downfall of anything. You no longer fear the loss of anything, or the power that someone might have over you. You fear Allah and Allah Himself alone. The kalimat tawheed also takes us away from the constraints of relationships, that we hold together, and at times we get so caught up in these relationships that we end up, worshiping them. Salah is meant to take us away, and this is from the Quran. Inna salata tanha anil fahsha'i wal munkari wal baghi. It takes us away from fahashi, or another definition would be a vice, from injustice, revolt, which is baghi, and then unlawful, which is munkar. These are the 3 Quranic Arabic terms that Allama uses here. Fasting is meant to take us away from our very basic need of self-indulgence. And also I add gluttony in there, like shikam parasti, like you just kind of you focus a lot on feeding your own self, and taking care of your own basic needs to eat good food. Charity, zakat, takes us away from the love of wealth, hubb dolat, and also teaches us equality, right? So that when we give for the sake of Allah, we create this balance between those who are rich and those who are poor. And if you look in the capitalistic societies like in the United States, now there exists a huge divide where you hear concepts like 1% of the individuals have 99% of the wealth. So charity is meant to not create those kind of dichotomies. Hajj presents to us this idea that we're not limited to a specific home, that we should not feel comfortable in a home, that we should be able to leave our dwellings and go through struggle and hardship for the sake of Allah. It also takes us away from being individualistic or being too attached to our nations and our surroundings, and teaches us the concept of what a millat or what a jami'at should be when it comes to Muslims when you go to Hajj. So all of these pillars of Islam teach us how to fight our nafs and how to take care of those drives and those qualities we talked about earlier. And ultimately, what ends up happening is a person who is the na'ib of Allah then contains within himself certain aspects, certain qualities that only a na'ib of Allah can have. And Iqbal mentions many. I have categorized them into 3 broad categories. You have the intrapersonal qualities, you have universal qualities, and you have prophetic qualities. So, for example, a na'ib instills youth-like passion in others, is able to bring that jazba, that junoon, and that ishq out from others. He instills hope and fear, the 2 of the qualities that Rasulullah ﷺ has, that the Quran mentions, Bashir and Nadhir. He's multifarious. Iqbal says that he's the Sipahi, the Sipahigar, and the Amir. That he's able to maintain all different level of duties that are assigned to him. He acts as a mentor and as a guide to others. Right? Through his shadow, the dust learns about the sun. Khurshid Ashina. It learns about the sun, and he revives the actions. Like it's not just the acts, but like how the acts are performed. He brings revival to tajdeed through that. He renews life and he renews visions. Tafsir Tarbiyat know. He knows and holds within himself the secrets and harmonies of life. Razo Saze Hayat. And he is also the destination of life. manzil karwan-e-zindagi. Some of the universal qualities, this person, Naib of Allah, is Jahan Bani, Jahan Ara. He's responsible, universally responsible. He adorns the world, brings goodness to the world. He has awareness of Juz'u Kull. He is, again, the revival and the creator of Fitra. Right? If it revives the human Fitra, which is, again, to do good and to be good. He strengthens that nature, right? He makes that Fitrat, strengthens it from all its deficiencies. He is the again, the goal of the potential of human beings, and he is driven by Allah and Allah alone. Some of the prophetic qualities he talks about, Allah draws analogy to the different prophets alayhimus salam. So, for example, Adam alayhi salam was given the knowledge of everything. So, allama al-asma'. The wisdom that the Prophet ﷺ, the wisdom in Mi'raj itself, like Subhanalladhi Asra, the protector of the Sharia, right, which is, he talks about Musa alayhi salam, the analogy he's giving of the asa and the dust safed, someone who guards and withholds the rule of Allah in this world. He's able to overcome barriers. He can dry up the Nile. He can split the Nile in two, like Musa alayhi salam. And the word qum, in the prophetic sense, meant that someone who brought life to the dead. But Iqbal uses that analogy as like bringing life to the dead hearts. His qum does that for people, and he leads others. He's a leader, much like the prophets were. And so these qualities are the ones that manifest for someone who is the Naib of Allah. So I've attempted to put all of these in a specific, in one drawing, so that you can visualize all of it. To make it a little bit easier, I've even made another kind of like a flow chart model here, and I've tried to put all of this knowledge or this information, into it. Beginning again at the bottom with obedience and the different aspects of obedience. And then from here, the person moves on to the self-control aspect, defining what the nafs is, the different drives of the nafs, and the different qualities of the nafs. And then how does self-control actually manifest? It manifests through this self-struggle with the help of the 5 pillars and the different qualities those 5 pillars instill within a human being, and ultimately leading to Niyabat Ilahi. So again, this is my own humble attempt. It's a very weak attempt at what Allama is talking about. I want to take this model in the future and make it more practical, and I would urge any psychology students, anyone who's in the field, to put this into practice. You can take some of these concepts, teach them to the clients, and see what positive outcomes that come from it. And that's how usually in the world of research, something theoretical becomes practical. Something that doesn't have much evidence to it becomes an evidence-based practice, is when the clinicians do this kind of work. I would like to see the implementation in various settings. So this isn't something that you can only apply in a clinical setting. Rather, businesses, schools, households can work towards achieving these qualities as well. And ideally, I would like to see these kind of models from Allama being published in psychology journals, because the field of psychology is so vast and so powerful that it is used to drive policies and drive practices in many, many different areas and facets of life. So having the presence of Iqbal there would be something that I would like to see, and inshallah I will work on it as well. My contact information is on here. You're more than welcome to contact me. If you have any criticism at all, I would love to hear it. I recognize my level and my place as a student, and many of you individuals that are listening to this or watching this have a lot more knowledge than I do. So I would like to hear back and grow myself as well in my understanding of the teachings of Allama Iqbal. So with that said, I'm very thankful. Jazakumullahu khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.